viene Kavya Sukumar a presentar su charla, pero vamos a ver si puede hablar o no. You think you can talk? She will try. Es interesante la charla que viene a presentar. Ella es programadora, es programadora y estudió ciencias de la computación. Y su charla se trata sobre la diferencia entre haber estudiado ciencias de la computación y programar. Me parece que es algo que se ve mucho. Yo siento que yo que no estudié ciencias de la computación, siento que mi trabajo es una cosa muy artesanal y veo realmente a los que estudian o estudiaron, los veo como una gente que sabe unas cosas distintas a las que yo sé. Entonces me parece interesante la charla como bueno, realmente separar lo que es una parte es programar y una parte es, bueno, entender ciencias de la computación, digamos, cómo funcionan las cosas y cómo. Me parece que son dos maneras de pensar distintas, pero bueno, lo dejo a ella que lo va a explicar mejor.
Right. Hi. Morning. I want to show you that I don't usually sound like Batman. I'm just getting over a really bad cold. Right, so apologies for the constant throat clearing, and if I get into a coughing fit, please excuse me. Right, my name is Kavya Sukumar, and that's my Twitter handle. If you have any bad throat remedies, I am accepting suggestions. Thank you. Right, and I'm an Open News Fellow at Vox Media. I work primarily on a tool called AutoTune, which helps developers make the code reusable easily. But I'm not going to talk about that right now. I have a workshop for that at 5 o'clock. If you're interested, please do come by. And that is assuming I can still talk, or I'm going to mime. But today I'm going to talk about something else. About a year ago, for a completely, let's try that again. About a year ago, for a completely different project, I surveyed about 40 journalists, people who are well ahead in their career, and also people who are just starting off. And I found out that if you are a young journalist, the advice that you're most likely to, career advice you're most likely to receive is that you have to go study computer science. And if you are an experienced journalist, you're most likely to give the advice, go study computer science. And most people take this to heart, go to a computer science department and take a class or two. But what happens after that is this. They get frustrated because and they decide that computer science departments don't teach anything useful, and they teach something antiquated like Java and not Python or Ruby, which you actually use in newsrooms. And then they decide that computer science is not for them and stay away from anything that has to do with coding. Right? And they often say, I tried it once and it didn't work out, it's not for me. Right? So here's my unsolicited advice, is don't study computer science. Unless, of course, you really want to. Instead, learn to code. Right? So computer science and coding are not the same thing. And trust me when I say that, because I studied computer science in my undergrad for 4 years. And if you ask anybody in the room who's studied computer science, and they'll probably agree with me when I say that it didn't have much to do with coding. So we did a lot of drawing these squiggly little diagrams called finite state machines. Our professors told us that it's important, and we never really understood why, but we drew it anyway for 4 years. And then we plugged wires into breadboards and hoped that the right LEDs lit up and that we did not fry the chip. And then we fought a lot of different machines. I learned a lot of fun things, but coding definitely was not one of them. Right. That's because most of the computer science classes concentrates on spending time to figure out how code actually works and not so much on actually coding. Right? And consequently, computer science professors are possibly the worst people to teach you to code. So it's definitely not a good idea to go to a computer science department and expect them to teach you to code in Python. And most people, as I said again, most people got through 4 years of college without really coding. people who majored in computer science. That's because of this awesome thing that we do called pseudocode, which is really coding for people who don't know to code, or computer scientists. It's great for concepts. It lets you learn how to write loops, write a lot of things without really being tied to one particular language or syntax, which means you really don't write usable code. So I was a theoretical computer science nerd in school, and more specifically, algorithms nerd. Sorting arrays is our jam. We learned to sort arrays in 15 different ways, and how each of them is different and why you need to use one or the other. So if you ask a computer scientist to sort an array, they'll ask you a lot of questions, a million questions, some of them severely socially unacceptable questions about arrays. And then they'll give you an artisanal solution, which is custom made for you and is independent of languages. They probably are going to give you pseudocode, which means you cannot directly use it unless you have somebody to actually translate it to usable code in a particular language. But if you ask a coder, they might give you one line of code which says something like array.sort, because they don't really care how exactly it's being done. And that's sort of the crux of the difference between computer science and coding. The idea of computer science is that everything that goes behind this thing is already taken care of for you, so you don't have to go study all these things. You get to actually use it. And it might seem like a excuse me, it might seem like an exaggeration, but trust me, I actually did this. 12 years ago, at my first internship, it was one of the most beautiful pieces of code I've ever written. I wrote 100 lines of code to actually sort an object array. And I went to my mentor, who reviewed my code, looked at me for 5 minutes, looked at the code, looked at me, and said, "You're one of those theoretical computer science people, aren't you?" So it happens. So computer science does not mean that you actually learn to code. So is it a waste of time? Absolutely not. So here's an analogy that kind of works until it breaks. So computer science is to coding, and biology is to medicine. So one is a science and other is the practice of it. So if you want somebody to be a doctor, you don't ask them to go study biology. So if you want somebody to code, don't ask them to go study computer science. Ask them to study coding. And similarly, if advancement in one drives the advancement in the other, they are closely tied, but they are not the same thing. If you ask a biology student to perform a surgery the first day out of school, it's not going to go well. And that's the same thing with asking a computer science student to write production quality code right out of school. And thankfully, that's where the analogy ends, because you don't really have to go to school to learn coding. Coding is something you can learn by yourself. So computer science is something that's good to know, but not the de facto requirement for every journalism student. They are completely different things, coding and computer science, again. Coding is a basic skill, like math or science. You don't learn math or science in school because you want to become a mathematician or a scientist. And so you don't have to learn coding to become a computer scientist. It should be a basic skill that's taught in schools. And even if it is not, I'm not going to claim to be able to bring about an education reform, but that's something that you can do when people come asking about how to get into data journalism or into coding, is to ask them to learn coding, not computer science. Right. So here, again, don't push people into computer science, promote coding instead. And when people ask you, what should I study? Don't tell them to go learn Ruby or Python or D3 or a particular library. Ask them to recommend areas and concepts, like tell them to learn to do data visualization or maybe mapping or just web programming, and you can recommend languages, but don't recommend languages that does the area or the concept well, but don't ask them to just go study a particular language. And when you see somebody who's new to code, be nice. Don't rewrite their code without asking them. And if they ask you for feedback, just don't just go and erase everything and rewrite. Just give them feedback and give good code review comments. And also realize that you're never too good to have your code reviewed. All right, so that's it. I made it.